Thank you so much for attending our virtual Career Speaker Series event. This program is open to JA students across the state of New Mexico and highlights business professionals, entrepreneurs, and innovative thinkers from a variety of industries. Each speaker will share details about their education, job, and career journeys. If during the presentation you have any questions for our speakers, please go ahead and write them down. And at the end of the speaker's presentation, we will open it to Q&A, and you can put those questions in the chat box. Today, we are very excited to welcome Peter Howley from Empirical Path, a digital marketing firm. Thank you so much for being here, Peter. I'll go ahead and share my screen, and the floor is all yours.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. All right. So yeah, I'm Peter Howley. I'm an entrepreneur who lives in Albuquerque. And Empirical Path was the company that I founded and sold. So it's now part of another company, and I'm excited to tell you about my path to becoming an entrepreneur and having a little bit of success. Next slide, please. And next. So when I was your age, even back to elementary school, certainly middle school and high school, I'll admit it, I was a pretty hard studying kid. A little bit of a nerd in that respect. Did a lot of extracurricular activities in sports, but the most important thing I did was make lifelong friends, and hopefully you're doing the same thing. I'm 51 years old now, and I still hang out with friends who go back to kindergarten, 7th grade, and 9th grade. It's kind of my core group. Unfortunately, they're all out of state, but trying to get them to visit New Mexico. I was a very competitive kid, whether that was sports or academics, and I competed to land at as many prestigious institutions as I could because I was just very ambitious. I wanted to make something of myself, and I credit my parents for giving me a lot of motivation. What I didn't expect was that I would struggle at really every one of these institutions. It was a big surprise. It was certainly tough to go through, but it was valuable because I learned what I'm good at, and I learned what kind of environments I thrive in. Next. I stumbled really into a growing field called web analytics, and I'll review what that is in a few moments. But it's kind of a niche area, a little bit technical, but definitely something that grew with the explosion of the internet and web and cell phones over the last 20 years or so. Once I had a good understanding of web analytics, I took a risk. I got a partner, and we started an online marketing consulting firm here in New Mexico back in 2008. Specifically, we focused on web analytics and measuring the marketing that was occurring and supporting the agencies and marketers who come up with the ads and build the websites. And we're very fortunate to sell our business to an advertising agency in 2022. Next. So my partner and I integrated our firm with the acquiring firm very successfully. My team is still working there, but he and I were free to kind of go do the next thing. So I'm taking 2023 off from work to decide what's next. In the meantime, I'm volunteering like I'm right now. I'm doing some angel investing, we call it, in local startups. That's investments that happen very early in a company's lifespan. Considering a local business to buy and taking some classes to broaden my marketing skills, because I think my next role will be a little bit more broadly about marketing and not just the measurement of the marketing. And most importantly, I'm spending time with my 14-year-old daughter and these adorable cats that you see in bottom right. Next, please. So my path on my resume, and which is how you go about getting a job later in life, lists all your education and experience. Looks pretty good. Asterisk, there'll be some additional comments. I was born in 1972, and as you can see, I was just all potential back then. Hadn't made any choices, no doors were closed. And even back in elementary school, in middle school, I was doing activities like theater, student newspaper, running cross country. I grew up in Maryland near Washington, D.C., so I got to visit the White House. And for the longest time, I thought I would go into politics, which is kind of a local business in the D.C. area. You can see back closer to 1990, I ended up going to Rice University in Houston, Texas. There, kind of continued to do more of the same, worked on the newspaper, interned. There you can see a picture of me with the congressman from the area at the time, and had a job on campus in the computer science lab, which ended up being really instrumental in how my career unfolded. Graduated in 1994, seems like a long time ago, I imagine to you, and was lucky enough to get a job at a firm called Bain & Company. Chances are you haven't heard of them. They compete with a more well-known firm called McKinsey, but they're management consultants. They advise businesses. And so I was in effectively an analyst program for 3 years where they took, bright, ambitious kids out of college and worked them about 60 to 70 hours a week, but you expose them to a ton of business concepts and quantitative techniques that have ended up being very valuable for me. Bain also had a great tradition of sending analysts after their 3 years to elite business schools. I was lucky enough to get into Harvard Business School, wanted to go back east and be closer to family. You can see I focused a lot on my quantitative or numerical skills there. I don't know if you can see, but that's a picture of me at Halloween dressed as a calculator. So you can see the nerdiness is still there. Incidentally, the guy next to me, my roommate, is significantly more successful. He's a Hollywood producer now, and he was the one who thought of the idea for the Lego movie and all of the spin-offs that have come from there. So after business school, the dot-com boom was happening. It's 1999, and so I went to join my hometown paper, the Washington Post, but specifically in their .com unit, WashingtonPost.com. That lasted 2 or 3 years. And then I did some other stuff in between before really settling on entrepreneurship and Empirical Path as the thing I wanted to do. More importantly, frankly, at about the same time, I became a parent. You can see me backpacking with my daughter when she was very little, probably 14 years ago. And that has honestly been, the highest priority. And one good thing about entrepreneurship is that ability to control your own schedule so that you can be with family and serve in those roles as well. Empirical Path was a lot of fun. We had a lot of clients in good locations. I got to go back to the White House and pitch the Obama administration on our services. You can see my partner and I there at Google out in Mountain View, California. We had an alliance or a partnership with them that was really transformative for our business, such that we actually grew to about 20 consultants. You can see about half the team there at a team building event in Atlanta. We had our team picture at a location that they used for the Walking Dead TV show, this abandoned factory. So it was kind of a fun time. Next, please. But as I said, the resume looks good, but there were struggles and setbacks along the way. As far back as junior high and high school, I was called a geek and a nerd. I wear that proudly now, but didn't appreciate it at the time. My school was much more about athletics and sports, which I did, but wasn't that supportive of kids who wanted to get good grades. My first real job out of college, Bain, I got put on probation. They had a very formal and strong human resources program to kind of give feedback and correct analysts and other employees who weren't on the right track. And so I took advantage of that, even though, it was tough to be on probation. Washington Post, I got laid off. It was 2002, 9/11 had just happened, and the advertising business was shrinking. So WashingtonPost.com chopped its whole marketing department where I worked. And then even as lately as at Empirical Path, I went back and looked. I think we pitched 250 different organizations, tried to sell them our services, and that said no. In some cases, they literally never called back. In other cases, they gave us some feedback. But rejection's tough when you're literally selling yourself and your team and your skills, and they're saying no. Next. Likewise, in college, I thought I was going to be a journalist or a politician, so I majored in English. And completely failed. I got my first ever C, didn't know what that even meant on a paper, and realized this is maybe not the right course for me. And as far as Harvard's concerned, I actually didn't get in right away. I was waitlisted, so I only found out in August that I needed to move to Boston in September. I definitely said yes, but I was by no means a shoo-in to go there. Next. But again, my message to you is that setbacks and failures are ways to learn, ways to find your best fit. So despite my classmates not appreciating me answering a lot of questions in class, I graduated 5th in my class and got into a prestigious school. At Bain, I got off probation. I took their feedback seriously. I worked with some mentors to get better and was eventually promoted at the company. WashingtonPost.com, I got laid off, but that's actually where I discovered web analytics, which is the field that Empirical Path worked in. And despite losing 250 plus pitches at Empirical Path, we won over 100. So we had all kinds of clients that I'll show you that said yes. Same thing in college. It turns out English wasn't the degree for me. Economics was. And eventually I was the top economics student in my class and got a scholarship for doing that. And Harvard Business School, nobody until now knew that I was waitlisted. So I'm still an MBA. The credential's still there. The networks and the relationships and the learning are all there. And so, a little bit of perseverance will go a long way. Next. So I'll briefly talk about web analytics just because that's the substance of what we did in my consulting firm. It all starts when you on your phone or browser pull up a web page or an app, and the client's web server, our client web server, feeds you that page. What Empirical Path does is give the client some JavaScript, which is programming code, to put on their web server so that your activities on the website are anonymously tracked. Next. That data flows to Google Analytics' server. Google is the leader in this field and one of our key partners, really our key partner. From there, it goes to log files, which is an extremely cumbersome way to get data and make decisions. So they send it through a processing engine to do things like filter the data out, slot it into reports, and so forth, all of which ends up in a database, which you probably know is just a repository for structured data that can talk to the internet. Next. From there, it goes to the part where the rubber hits the road. Actual reports, dashboards, we built them in Google Analytics. We would export data from Google Analytics to Google Looker Studio and other business intelligence tools. And this is ultimately what we were hired for, was to enable clients to understand, this is how people are finding my app, this is how people are using my website, these are the articles that they're reading, these are the things that they're buying, and why aren't they buying in the case of an e-commerce website. So pretty niche field, but I was not a comp sci major or a technical person. I'm still not a programmer, and I was able to learn it a little bit on the job, but also teaching myself over the years, and learned a lot from my business partner and other employees that we hired. Next. So Empirical Path took that web analytics, and you can see our gross revenue. It was kind of sucking wind for a couple of years there while we figured things out, but it started to spike. And again, we were fortunate to be acquired by Momentum as a result, which for an entrepreneur, you might think, oh, you had to sell your business. Like, no, we were fortunate to sell the business. That was the goal, was to make money at it by exiting, as we say. Next. And really all of that success started with the team. That's the foundation. You can see my business partner on the left. It was really just him and me for quite a few years. You can see some logos like IntelliQuant and DaveTurney.com. We were so small and scrappy, we couldn't afford to have somebody be an actual employee with benefits and things like that. So we used contractors to fill in the gaps of my partner and my technical knowledge. Finally, in 2016, though, we were able to hire some W-2 employees, the proper employees. We built a 401k plan and a health plan to attract quality talent. And you can see Nettie and Jay there, fantastic hires, really set the stage for a strong group. They were with us all the way through 2021. Next. The next piece was something, frankly, in business school and when I was your age, I didn't understand the importance of. I just sort of assumed if you have a consulting firm, the team talks to clients and that's it. But in the case of technology and other fields as well, there's really a lot of roles for partners. And becoming a Google Analytics authorized consultant back in 2010, when honestly we were just two guys in our home offices, was a breakthrough for us because people started calling us and we had a credential that told them that we really understood Google Analytics well. So in 2013, when Google Analytics brought out a product more for large organizations that cost 6 figures, we were allowed to become a reseller of that product so that we could take a commission or a revenue share off of that 6-figure annual spend and use that to invest more in the team and everybody else. So the partners were really valuable for introducing us to clients, giving us legitimacy, and training us on the new technology. Next. Another kind of middleman I didn't know would be important were ad agencies. Again, in marketing, some companies do their own marketing, but most hire an ad agency. And that ended up being a real force multiplier for us. We were one of the few companies that did web analytics and didn't do ad agency stuff. So these agencies liked partnering with us because they knew we weren't going to try to go to the client and get the display advertising business or the search advertising business. MWC is McKee Wallwork here in Albuquerque, hugely helpful at getting us into some clients and understanding how agencies work. Next. Finally, the clients. This is where the rubber hits the road. There's no money unless they're there. And we started off with kind of an odd collection. Business Insider was our first client. And then a small company called Airshow Buzz, ASB, was our next client. Business Insider grew and grew. They were a publisher up in New York, and they sold to a German media conglomerate for, I think, $400 million. Airshow Buzz, it turned out everyone was working illegally in a apartment where you weren't supposed to do commercial business. And eventually the company went away. But we filled in with other clients. I tried to list some that are familiar to you. Visit Albuquerque is the group that tries to drive tours into Albuquerque for the Balloon Fiesta and otherwise. CNM is a great community college option where they actually teach Google Analytics as a class, where you can pick up some other skills. But, we had some household names. We had some small clients. Really, our attitude was, we'll take almost anybody, because once you're in with a client, you can expand and grow and learn things. So we're very proud of these logos, and most of these clients are still working with the firm that acquired us now. Next. So what's a typical day like for an entrepreneur? I think lots of people have a very full calendar. This is kind of normal, I think, for people in the business world. But what's unusual about being an entrepreneur, and really any kind of general manager, is that you really have to work across different functional areas or departments throughout the day. So you can see in the legend in the upper right-hand side, the number one thing I worked on was sales and marketing. That's contacting organizations that might need us, responding to their inquiries, posting on social media about our events and so forth. Team management, human resources was taking care of the team, making sure that they're happy, training, interviewing new ones, giving feedback to my direct reports. Client work, can't forget that. Even as we grew and grew, I maintained a few clients of my own, and that's the dark green in some ways because that's where the money is, and you never can let that slip. I mentioned the partnership with Google and other firms. That's another big part of the job. And you can see just from the colors, like the day, you don't get to just focus on one thing one day. You've got to kind of switch gears, go from buying to selling and pitching to serving the clients pretty rapidly. But it's exciting. It's challenging because nobody comes into entrepreneurship knowing each of these functional areas. Next. Key lessons. So my takeaways from this path, and it's not over yet, but 51 years on this earth, probably working for all but 15 of those, is that people from all types of backgrounds can thrive. But it is ultimately your responsibility to make that happen. You've got parents, you've got teachers, you've got principals, guidance counselors. They're all there to assist you. That's extremely valuable. We'll talk about mentorship in a minute. But ultimately, you're the one who lives with the results of your choices. So I encourage everyone to really take ownership of their path. Next. It's a competition, at least, especially in the business world, but in your schooling years and when you're starting out in your career, you're being compared to your peers to decide who gets into the top school, who gets the good job, who gets the best tasks within the good job. So don't be embarrassed to excel. I mentioned in high school, my school did not encourage, my peers did not encourage me to excel in academics. But I stuck with it. I dealt with some of the nonsense that comes, and it definitely paid off. Next life lesson is make a plan, then adapt it. Setbacks and failures, like I showed you on my timeline, are frustrating and painful to go through, but they're ultimately how you find your fit. If you're not experiencing those, you might not be ambitious and trying hard enough, because things shouldn't be easy. Otherwise, you don't learn. Next. Finally, my sense from being an employee, being an employer, serving clients is that people deciding where to spend the money, they reward hustle, they reward reliability, can I count on you, and they reward a positive attitude. You don't necessarily have to have every skill that an employer or client needs, but if you've got these three things, you'll have an opportunity to learn additional skills and get additional challenges. Finally, as I hinted at before, please find and lean on mentors. This could be family members, bosses, older cousins, in my case, that help you navigate the path that you want to take. Every career field is a relationship business ultimately. And a key relationship for you is to have mentors who are out there pulling for you and helping you answer the tough questions that you'll come across. So that's it for me. Would love to hear any questions and answer them as best I can.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Peter, for sharing your story. I really loved learning a little bit more about web analytics and your journey into how you got to sell your business and take a whole year off as a vacation. That's awesome. I'm a very, very cool story. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
My pleasure.
All righty, students, we will now move into our Q&A portion of the event. I've opened the chat box, so go ahead and throw those questions in the chat box for Mr. Peter. But I will start off with a couple of Q&A questions asked in the registration. So, Mr. Peter, can you please tell us a time in your life when you failed at work and how you handled it?
Well, so I pointed to a few setbacks, but ultimately those companies were valuable steps in my career. But the failure was one I kind of left off because before being an entrepreneur with web analytics consulting, I tried to be an entrepreneur when I lived in DC, to create a company that would match job seekers graduating from college with employers who are looking to hire them. Specifically in the DC area, and specifically for kids like me who go to school far away and don't always meet the hometown recruiters on campus. It was called Career Treks. Still very proud of it, but ultimately it did not go. And the lesson in some ways was don't try to do everything yourself. Having a business partner in my second venture was huge in terms of somebody to complement my skills and just to have an ally to bounce ideas off of. But also don't give up. I mean, I could have been soured on entrepreneurship. I think I spent about a year's pay trying to build the company, but met good people and don't regret it.
For sharing your experience with that setback. Thank you. One more question from the registration, and then we'll go to the chat. Who was your biggest influence growing up?
Yeah, it's funny. I would refuse to admit it at the time, but I've got to say it was my father. He was a guy who, grew up kind of tough in Brooklyn, New York, and couldn't go to college right away, so he went to the Navy and learned electronics, and ended up working in the defense industry and getting promoted over the years. And you guys probably perceive your parents sometimes as, not that wise, maybe a little goofy. And I thought my dad, frankly, was sort of too nice of a guy. But it turns out you get more flies with honey than vinegar. Is that the expression? Sure. And seeing his people skills and how his team, when he retired, honored him at his retirement party was really moving and influential for me to decide to invest in having teammates and building those kind of relationships. And, you're out there pitching clients. It's all honey. You can't bring any vinegar.
It's all honey, absolutely. All right, we can go to our chat. There are a few questions from the students on the call. First question is, you mentioned that you struggled a little in secondary education. Can you speak a little more specifically about what you struggled with and how you persevered?
Absolutely, yeah. So this is college and potentially business school as well, secondary, right? Yeah, not high school. Yeah, so I mentioned, kind of choosing the wrong major. But even in my eventual major, political science, I remember getting my first paper back, and I think again a C minus. The funniest part was my good friend was a physics major taking the class for fun, and he got a better grade than me. So he still gives me grief about that. And when I sat down and really diagnosed the problem, I realized that I was pretty fortunate in high school to kind of get by on smarts. I mean, I certainly worked hard, or I thought I worked hard, but it was nothing like the level of effort I needed to put in to be successful in college. And again, in my case, I was juggling the academics with a couple different jobs and activities. And that actually kind of, I think, prepared me for like the 60, 70-hour weeks of my first job and, some of the long nights that come with being an entrepreneur. So I hate to boil it down to something as work harder. But, other than course correcting to economics, it really was a question of realizing, okay, used to be one of the smartest kids. Now I'm kind of average here. I better bring it up.
Another question from the chat. What are your cats' names?
Yeah, those were there when they were very young kittens. Milo is the boy who's dark gray, and Maxine's the girl who's kind of tortoise shell. And I've got all these doors closed because they're so used to jumping on my desk and my lap when I work at home. But yeah, they brought a lot of joy for me and my daughter. Animal Humane, great organization.
Milo and Maxine. Those are good. Those are good cat names. I like the same letters of the first letter. Another question from the chat. You mentioned that you spent a lot of time in the White House and with the Obama administration, excuse me. Did you ever actually get to meet the president?
Oh, interesting. So no, yeah, we were kind of hoping to, but ultimately we went in there to pitch the administration. It was through a relationship with somebody I knew at Washington Post who was running a lot of the digital stuff for the White House, but they did not end up working with us. So yeah, it was one of those 250 that didn't go instead of the 100 that did.
Thank you. Thank you. A couple more questions here. One of the students wanted to know, what was it like going to Harvard?
It's a good question because so many people that are ambitious and good at school sort of set that as their goal. And ultimately, you know, I mentioned being waitlisted. Fundamentally, you know, Harvard wasn't a fit for me. And I really wouldn't have known how to figure that out beforehand. I just had to go in there and experience it. Had a great time, made a bunch of good friends, but kind of struggled with the aspect of the grades come from class participation. And so, you know, I'm a little bit more of an introvert. I'm nervous talking to you guys virtually. And so raising my hand in front of a group of 90 competitive peers to answer questions was not my strong suit. But, you know, worth the pain. I mean, for better or for worse, the Harvard logo, the name on your resume certainly opens a lot of doors. And it exposed me to, you know, having been in Texas for so long, it exposed me to peers who had come up, you know, West Coast, overseas. One of my mentors was a guy a year ahead of me who's from Norway. That's invaluable. And I think all the Harvard schools have that kind of diversity, but so does UNM and Rice and many other places.
Very cool. That's interesting that it wasn't, that you didn't think it was quite a great fit for you at first. Do you have any advice for our upper high school students how to find a college that's a better fit?
Yeah. I mean, the thing that convinced me to go to Rice and not where my mom wanted me to go, which was Duke, was visiting both campuses and just kind of, I mean, I'm generally like a very quantitative guy. Let's analyze things, but there's just also kind of that vibe and gut side of like, oh, these are kind of my people here at Rice, dorks in shorts, and lots of cool personalities. And the Duke kids were less so. So I'd say, yeah, put in that time now to visit. If you've got any kind of connection to a current or recent student, they're probably happy to give you the skinny. I see kids on the Rice University subreddit on Reddit asking a lot of these questions too about what it's really like. So don't short shrift that, and don't just chase after the highest ranking or the best name, because what's going to matter is how well you do there. And that's where fit plays a huge role.
Thank you so much for that advice. You're absolutely right. Thank you. All right. Are there any other last minute questions from students in the room that they want to throw into the chat? Last chance to ask Mr. Peter any questions about web analytics, about his business empirical path, going to Harvard. All right, I think that's all of them. So we'll go ahead and wrap up this event. Thank you so much, Peter, and students. We hope you enjoyed today's program. Before we log off, just a couple of announcements. Following this presentation, you will be asked to complete a post-program mindset survey. We really appreciate your participation in evaluating programs. Educators, you can find the link to that survey in your inbox or in the description of the video later. Lastly, please make note that these events are happening monthly, and we will be hosting these on the second Wednesday of every month. Next month, on November 8th, we will welcome Leona Davis Brown, the Director of Marketing at the United Way of North Central New Mexico. So keep an eye out for those registration links in your email. But thank you again so much, students. And thank you so much, Peter. Everyone on the call, I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.